greatest art heist in history. The night everything changed, March 18th, 1990, Boston, Massachusetts. The city was asleep, the streets were quiet, and inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, 2 security guards were working the night shift. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing seemed dangerous, but within the next few hours, they would become part of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern history. A mystery worth more than $500 million. A mystery that remains unsolved more than 3 decades later. At approximately 1:24 a.m., a white car slowly approached the museum. 2 men stepped out. They were dressed as Boston police officers. Everything about them looked convincing. The uniforms, the badges, the confidence, the way they carried themselves. If you saw them walking down the street, you would never question who they were. A few moments later, they knocked on the museum door. The guard on duty, 23-year-old Richard Abath, approached the entrance. The men identified themselves as police officers. They explained that they had received reports of suspicious activity in the area. According to them, someone may have been attempting to enter the museum grounds. They needed to investigate. At first, the request seemed reasonable, but there was a problem. Museum policy was crystal clear. No one was allowed inside after hours. No exceptions, not even police officers. Yet instead of refusing, Abath hesitated. Then he said something strange. "Wait here for a minute." And he walked away. The 2 men stood outside, waiting, wondering. Why had he left? Was he calling the real police? Had he become suspicious? Had the entire operation just failed? 60 seconds passed. Then the door opened. Abath returned. Without another question, he let them inside. That single decision would become one of the most expensive mistakes in history, because the 2 men were not police officers. They were thieves, and they had just gained access to one of the most valuable private art collections on Earth. What happened next was both simple and brilliant. Almost immediately, one of the fake officers asked Richard Abath to step away from the front desk. Then he requested identification. Moments later, the officer looked directly at him and said, "You're under arrest." The guard froze. The officer claimed that they had discovered evidence connecting him to suspicious activity. Abath was shocked, but he cooperated. Within moments, he was handcuffed. The thieves searched him, restrained him, and escorted him into the basement. There, they taped his mouth shut, covered his eyes, and chained him to a pipe. Then they found the second security guard. He received exactly the same treatment. In less than 15 minutes, the museum was completely under their control. No witnesses, no resistance. No interruptions. The thieves now had free access to one of the world's most extraordinary art collections. And surprisingly, they weren't in a hurry. This is one of the strangest parts of the entire story. Most professional robberies are designed around speed. Get in, get the target, get out. Every second increases the risk of being caught. But these men behaved differently. They stayed inside the museum for 81 minutes. 81 minutes. Think about that. For over an hour. They calmly walked through the galleries while 2 helpless guards sat chained in the basement. No panic, no rushing, no mistakes. Almost as if they knew nobody was coming. Almost as if they had rehearsed every step. And maybe they had, because what they did next suggests this operation had been planned with extraordinary precision. First, they disabled critical security systems. Then they began selecting specific works of art, not the biggest, not the most famous, not even the most valuable. Instead, they chose a bizarre collection of pieces that would confuse investigators for decades. Some masterpieces worth enormous fortunes were left untouched. Others were ripped directly from their frames. In some cases, the thieves didn't even bother removing the frames from the wall. They simply sliced the canvas out and carried it away. The damage was shocking. Paintings were slashed. Frames were abandoned. And by the time the thieves finally disappeared into the night, 13 priceless objects were gone forever, including works by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Degas, and several other treasures that can never truly be replaced. The estimated value? More than $500 million, making it the largest art theft in human history. But the most fascinating question wasn't what was stolen. It was why. Because when investigators examined the crime scene, they discovered something deeply unsettling. The thieves had ignored other masterpieces worth enormous sums of money, pieces that would have been easier to sell, easier to transport, and arguably more valuable, which raised a disturbing possibility. Maybe the paintings weren't the real target. Maybe something else inside that museum was far more important. And if that was true, then this wasn't just a robbery. It was something much bigger. The deeper investigators looked into the case, the less sense it made. The thieves had spent 81 minutes inside the museum, more than enough time to steal many other masterpieces. Yet they left countless opportunities behind. Why? Nobody could answer that question, and that was only the beginning. The next few minutes will shock everyone. When FBI agents started reconstructing the timeline of the robbery, another strange detail emerged. The thieves didn't behave like amateurs. Everything appeared organized, controlled, disciplined. They knew exactly where they were going, exactly which galleries to visit, and exactly which objects they wanted. There was very little hesitation, very little uncertainty, almost as if someone had studied the museum long before that night. But if that was true, who and how? Investigators interviewed museum employees, former employees, security personnel, art experts, collectors, criminal informants, anyone who might know something. Years passed, and decades, yet the answers never came. Meanwhile, the empty frames remained hanging on the walls, exactly where the stolen masterpieces had once been. The museum made a deliberate decision. They refused to replace them. Visitors would continue to see the empty spaces. This is a permanent reminder of what had been lost, and perhaps more importantly, a reminder that the mystery was still unsolved. But investigators weren't completely without leads. Over the years, countless theories began to emerge. Some believed organized crime was responsible. Others suspected professional art thieves from Europe. Some even wondered whether the stolen artworks had never left the United States at all. Then came one of the most controversial theories. A theory that would send investigators down a path filled with gangsters, informants, and the criminal underworld of Boston. Because several years after the robbery, Federal investigators began hearing the same names again and again and again. Names connected to organized crime, names connected to art theft, names connected to people who suddenly seemed to know far too much about what had happened inside the museum that night. For the first time, the investigation appeared to be moving somewhere, but every lead created new questions, and every answer led to another dead end, because in the Gardner Museum mystery, nothing was ever simple, and the closer investigators thought they were getting, the further away the truth seemed to become. For years, investigators chased those names across Boston. Some belonged to career criminals. Others were connected to organized crime families that had operated in the city for decades. Informants claimed they had heard stories about the stolen paintings. Rumors spread through the criminal underworld. Yet whenever investigators got close to something concrete, the trail seemed to vanish. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence disappeared. Suspects died. And the mystery only grew deeper. Then another strange detail emerged. The stolen artworks never appeared on the open market. Not a single painting, not a single drawing, not a single confirmed sale. This was almost unheard of. Artworks worth hundreds of millions of dollars simply do not disappear. Sooner or later, somebody tries to sell them. Somebody talks. Somebody makes a mistake. But in this case, nothing happened. The paintings seemed to vanish from the face of the earth. That led investigators to a troubling theory. What if the thieves had never intended to sell the artwork at all? What if the paintings were being used for something else? In the criminal world, stolen masterpieces can become powerful bargaining chips. They can be exchanged for reduced prison sentences, used as collateral in illegal deals, hidden away as insurance policies for future negotiations. Suddenly, the robbery started to look very different. Perhaps this had never been about art. Perhaps it had always been about leverage. But if the paintings were still out there, somebody had to know where they were, and that meant the investigation could not stop. Over the years, the FBI executed search warrants, interviewed countless suspects, and followed leads across multiple states. Millions of dollars were spent. Thousands of hours were invested. Yet the empty frames inside the museum remained exactly where they had been left. Silent reminders of a crime that refused to be solved. Then, decades after the robbery, investigators made a startling announcement. They believed they had identified the people responsible, not just suspects, not just persons of interest, the actual thieves. According to federal investigators, the robbery had been carried out by members of a criminal organization operating in New England. For the first time, it seemed the mystery was finally approaching a conclusion. But there was one enormous problem. The FBI knew who they believed had stolen the artwork, yet they still did not know where the artwork was. And without the paintings themselves, the greatest mystery of all remained unanswered. But who were these men? And what exactly happened to them after the robbery? According to investigators, one of the key figures linked to the case was a career criminal with deep connections to Boston's organized crime network. His name appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation. Informants mentioned him. Associates pointed in his direction. Federal agents spent years trying to verify the claims. Then another name surfaced, and another. But one of those names stood out above all the others. It was James Whitey, Bulger, one of the most infamous crime bosses in American history and a legendary figure in Boston's criminal underworld. His name surfaced repeatedly during the investigation. Informants mentioned him. Rumors pointed in his direction. Investigators spent years examining whether he had any connection to the robbery. For nearly 2 years, Bulger remained under scrutiny as federal agents searched for evidence that could tie him to the case. But suspicion alone was never enough. In 1992, investigators concluded that there was insufficient evidence linking Bulger to the robbery, and he was ruled out as a suspect. Gradually, investigators began building a picture of what they believed had happened. The robbery was not the work of random thieves. It was a coordinated operation carried out by individuals who already knew each other, individuals who understood the criminal underworld, individuals who knew how to disappear. Yet despite years of investigation, prosecutors faced a major obstacle. Most of the evidence was indirect. Witness testimony, informant statements, criminal rumors, fragments of conversations collected over decades. Enough to build theories, not enough to secure convictions. Then time started working against everyone. Several of the men suspected of involvement died before investigators could fully question them. Others disappeared from public view. Potential witnesses passed away, memories faded. Evidence became harder to verify. It was as if the case itself was slowly slipping into history, and still the paintings remained missing. Some investigators believed the artwork had been moved multiple times over the years, hidden in basements, warehouses, safe houses, private collections, perhaps even transported outside the country. Every possibility was considered. None could be proven. Then came another unsettling realization. If the paintings had survived this long, they might still exist somewhere today. Hidden behind locked doors, stored in darkness, waiting for someone to reveal their location. Imagine that for a moment. Some of the world's most valuable masterpieces could be sitting in an unknown room while millions of people search for them. A secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A secret that dozens of investigators dedicated their lives trying to uncover. Yet the museum never gave up hope. The empty frames remained on display. The reward money continued to grow. Public appeals continued year after year. Every new lead was investigated. Every tip was examined. Because all it would take is one person, one mistake, one conversation, one piece of information, and the entire mystery could finally unravel. But after more than 3 decades, that moment still has not arrived. The paintings are gone. The thieves are gone. Many of the suspects are gone. Yet the mystery remains. And that is what makes the Gardner Museum robbery different from almost every other art theft in history. It is not just a story about stolen paintings. It is a story about unanswered questions, missing evidence, hidden motives, and a secret that refuses to die. Over the years, dozens of theories have attempted to explain what really happened to the missing masterpieces. Some are reasonable, Others sound like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. Yet despite decades of investigation, nobody has been able to prove any of them. The first theory points directly toward organized crime. According to this theory, the paintings were never stolen to be sold. They were stolen to be used as bargaining chips, assets that could be exchanged for reduced prison sentences, legal favors, or protection from prosecution. Investigators found evidence suggesting that several criminals connected to the Boston underworld may have known more about the robbery than they were willing to admit. But if organized crime was responsible, then one question remains. Where are the paintings now? The second theory is even more disturbing. Some believe the artwork was secretly purchased by a wealthy private collector, someone with unlimited resources, someone willing to hide priceless masterpieces away from the world forever. Imagine owning one of the most famous missing paintings on Earth, a masterpiece that nobody else can see, a treasure that officially no longer exists. It sounds unbelievable, yet investigators cannot completely rule it out. Then there is the third theory, the theory that continues to haunt the case more than any other. What if the paintings were destroyed? What if something went wrong after the robbery? A fire, a flood, a panic decision made by criminals trying to avoid being caught. It is a possibility nobody wants to consider, because if it is true, some of the world's greatest artworks may be gone forever. Lost not because they were stolen, but because they were erased from history. And that is what makes this case so fascinating. More than 30 years later, nobody knows which theory is correct. Maybe the paintings are hidden in a warehouse. Maybe they are locked inside a private collection. Maybe they no longer exist at all. The truth remains buried somewhere in the shadows. Meanwhile, visitors continue walking through the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum every single day. They stop in front of the empty frames. They read the descriptions. They look at the spaces where masterpieces once hung. And they ask the same question investigators have been asking since March 18, 1990. What really happened that night? Perhaps one day the missing paintings will be recovered. Perhaps a forgotten witness will finally speak. Perhaps a hidden secret will eventually come to light. But until that happens, the Gardner Museum robbery remains exactly what it has always been. The greatest unsolved art heist in human history. The greatest unsolved art heist in human history. A crime worth more than $500 million. A mystery that survived generations. And a story that may still be hiding its biggest secret.